What's up guys, let's go over it. The updated build guide for one of the best builds this season in last Epoch. The starter of the season for most people is going to be the Falconer because it is so dang powerful. So how does this build actually play? This is going to be a update to my previous build, as this is going to be a progression series. The difference between getting to the early game maps versus doing corruption, and then on top of that pushing 1,000 or 2,000 corruption, the builds are going to be a lot different. So this is mainly going to be focusing in on, let's say after the campaign, you can start playing this, but also if you're just pushing into the earlier corruptions, when you're still trying to gear up, maybe you don't have any exalted pieces of gear, maybe you have that one legendary item because, well, in the trade league, you can get that a lot earlier on before you start getting all of your exalted pieces, which are the purple items. So this is exactly what I was using in the gameplay. Just keep in mind that some of the stats that are on these pieces of gear aren't absolutely perfect. Some of the stats actually do nothing, and it's to show you guys that this build can still one-shot most of the content in 100 plus corruption. So for starters, let's go over the skills. We'll go over the passives as well as all the things in the build. So for starters, this is what's on our skill bar. So we have Explosive Trap. This actually activates and gives us ballistas for a very cheap mana cost. That's what we actually use it for. It also applies a debuff to the enemy, as well as giving us a bunch of different buffs that require us to actually crit to grant us haste, so we can use our mobility a lot more frequently, just being able to go through the maps much faster. And then we have falconry. We actually have this on what's bound to be over here. It's actually a little falcon ability that attacks the enemies. And then we have dive bomb, and that's going to be another source of damage, and this actually just costs 0 mana. And then Ballista over here is on the bar, and if you want to activate it manually, that's fine, but this is kind of a free slot. You don't actually have to equip it at all. It's just sometimes I like to use Ballista up until the boss. On specifically the bosses, shredding the enemy's resistances with the Explosive Trap, it's just a lot easier to go ahead and actually get more min-maxing in terms of DPS, and it actually makes the build feel a lot better to actually grant yourself some additional buffs with the stuff that you'll see later on as we go over the build. But pretty much you just spam Explosive Trap, and then you can just kind of breeze through the map with some of your mobility, like Aerial Assault over here. This is our mobility skill. So as far as the build goes, you spam Explosive Trap, but if you want to, you can also just activate 2 or 3 ballistas here or there. But on bosses in particular, the Explosive Trap build is just superior because it gives you more DPS and it gives you lots of stacks of frailty. Each hit with Explosive Trap actually individually hits them 6 times. As long as it hits the enemy once, it will activate the additional explosive traps on them, and you just get a huge amount of survivability because you can apply frailty to the enemy and any other debuffs or chance to, do whatever on hit. This is an excellent skill for that. And then again, falconry, these are just kind of like extra bonus DPS, and I've actually made the build a lot better now because they will be able to activate immediately without your character having to actually activate an animation. And then Aerial Assault, again, is just our mobility skill that we use to traverse the map. As far as the items go, ideally you just try to max out your resistances. Now, I've already maxed out my resistances. Now, again, we do not have any exalted piece of gear. If you do have them, that's great. That's excellent. Let's go ahead and start from the top. So as far as the helmet goes, you can run a lot of different things. You can get a helmet with cooldown reduction. You can get extra resistances in this area. I don't even have a good peek of the mountain. The stats on this can actually roll much higher. You guys can see over here, it rolls higher in the attribute category. That's the only stat that matters in addition with the crit strike chance. That one are the 2 stats that you want to kind of look out for. If I could just choose one, as long as you have 100% crit on your character, that's all you want. Now there is a Falcon armor that you can run instead, and there's another armor that gives you additional base crit. As long as you reach 100% crit, you could look for a lower roll on Peak of the Mountain, but this is a super common unique, so I wouldn't worry too much about getting like a good one. As long as you get it, it'll pretty much be a really good item. As far as the amulet goes, that damage while channeling, that's nothing. Ideally, you want to try to get a gold amulet because that's going to give you double res. And then I like to have a lot of mana regen, as well as getting a double resistances in the suffixes. And if you want on the prefix, you can get increased minion damage. That is really good. And at the moment, right now, I actually have all exalted gear, but this is as I was progressing. A lot of you guys wanted the build guide, and I think that there's definitely kind of 3 builds that you want to have in terms of a progression. You have like your early game, and then your mid game, and then your late game, like level 100. So there's going to be a good in between for most players that have not achieved the min max, because honestly, getting 4 legendary potential in every single category is going to be a nightmare for most people, and what I would consider near impossible for I would say the average player, as well as even advanced players, getting even 2 or 3 is really pushing it for how much time is required in Last Epoch, especially if you're not doing Trade League. Now, as far as the bow goes, I highly recommend the Talons of Valor. That one is a really good unique, and it's going to allow you to get extra stats to Falconry, Dive Bomb, Aerial Assault, and it gives you base crit. That's the most important thing. Now, I did craft this one. Technically, you do need an Exalt, but all you're really looking for on the Exalt is 2 good stats. This was a 2 LP one, and ideally, even if it's 1 LP, you just try to roll into the crit strike chance, so you have that additional base crit. Other than that, the extra crit strike chance is nice, but the main thing that you want with this is any sort of bow that has a high base crit, and then if you happen to have anything with legendary potential to slam it in there, that would be ideal, and that's how you're going to get 100% crit. And you'll see that in some of the equipment over here, we do actually reach 100% crit with this. If I go to the damage over here, you'll see that our crit strike chance is 100% for a lot of different ones, and that is kind of important because the minion, aka the crossbow ballista thing, that will actually deal damage based off of your crit. So that's what's important to go ahead and actually hit over here. And so that's why you want a lot of base crit. And then for the chest piece over here, I'm running in Elite Regalia. So I really like this because it gives us that base mana regen. Again, you can run the Falcon one if you want to. You can run the other one with additional base crit. If you do not reach 100% crit, I recommend running the body armor that does give you base crit. So the base crit one is actually called, if I go ahead and mouse over it, it is the Falconry armor is great as well, but there's another one that gives you a base crit. Okay, it's the Dragon Hide coat. So that gives you crit strike, avoidance, as well as base crit. So this is the implicit on it. So try to get an implicit that just rolls with 3. It's a pretty high chance. I mean, it's literally 50-50. The rest of the crit strike avoidance, that's great to have, but you can actually get crit strike avoidance really easy with just 1 additional roll. So if it rolls there, that's fine. But there's another thing with a blessing, and you can get crit strike avoidance over here if you get the grand one. I actually have the grand one. So if you get the one that gives you crit strike avoidance, this is the one that you want to try to go ahead and get. The Grand Survival of Might. This is the one I actually have. I don't remember my exact rolls. I think it's like 60 something. Just get 100% crit strike avoidance. It will save you in this game a lot. But yeah, the armor is a little bit flexible, but all you really want to do is become a dex stacker. So stacking as much dexterity as possible, because that's going to increase the size of your explosions with the ballista. And then for our quiver, again, you just kind of want like HP or like mana. That's totally fine. It's very flexible as long as it just has dex. The other 2 suffixes could be some sort of defensive ones. And then for our offhand on the quiver, I really like the Ivory quivers, and that is because it gives you fizz and necrotic resistance, and then just again getting dex. That increased physical damage, that is not a good roll. We would ideally want either minion damage. So as far as the prefixes go, minion damage can be good. You can go with cold or fire damage on it, and then you would just not run Morning Frost if you want to just keep the damage to be fire. It's actually a lot better for survivability because you can one-shot things even without Morning Frost, as I was testing it later on, but this will just guarantee that you will just one-shot everything. Now, there is a downside with this because it does give you negative cold and physical resistances, but with just 2 or 3 pieces of gear, just 1 roll on each one, you can easily mitigate it. You're going to have negative 100 cold and negative 100 physical, so on a few pieces of gear, basically, you need 4 additional rolls. So that could be on, let's say, your quiver, like you have 1 roll with physical resistance on the implicit for this one, and then you have that additional physical resistance that you can mod up. This is a really low roll over here for like the tier on the suffix, but ideally you try to get that up high, and then at that point this negative side does not really matter too much. And with the belt, the Spider Silk Sash, you're going to have excellent resistances. So again, look out for the Ivory Quiver. That probably is one of the best in slots. And then for one of the rings, I went with 1 copper ring, just so we can get some extra crit strike chance. But on your rings, the 2 important stats are going to be that mana regen as well as dexterity. You can see I have them on both. I actually don't need the fire res on this, but it specifically just happens to have good rolls on it. So that increased mana regen as well as that dex. Those are the 2 important stats. Then you can get some resistances. And you just need 1 piece of gear. Something needs to roll with crit strike avoidance. Just in total on your character, make sure you get 100% crit strike avoidance as you're going in the corruptions. This actually is going to get you killed a lot of times when you get crit, especially if you get like unlucky and 2 enemies crit you, especially because in general, a lot of builds may not have very high armor until you start getting exalted pieces of gear. And on top of that, we actually do maintain about 1,000 of each in the earlier stages, which is really easy for dodge as well as armor to kind of keep up your survivability. And then for the belt over here, the spider silk sash, this is one of the best in slots. So it's got the implicits of cold and poison resistance, and then you can get extra stats that can help out with even more mana regen, because I really like to never be out of mana. And then on top of that, getting extra cold damage is what you're trying to look for, or if you want to over here, instead of cold, you can also get minion damage. Those are the 2 best in slots for this build. And then for our gloves, I really like the arcane bracers because that gives you armor, flat mana, as well as mana regen. And then if you can get crit strike chance, that's okay, but ideally, again, dex every single area that you can get. And then you need to get cold and physical somewhere in your build. Again, it doesn't have to be specifically on the gloves, but you can get that on your chest piece, you can get that on your relic. There's a lot of other places, but you just need a lot of cold and physical, because the boots over here, the Morning Frost, one of the best pair of boots in the entire game. Well, they give you +1 cold damage to attacks and spells per point of dex, but you lose physical and cold res per point of dexterity. So that's where it's going to factor in over there. And then for our offhand, this was actually a pretty bad one. It doesn't even have dex, but ideally you want it to have dex. If you get mana regen or crit strike chance, that's okay. I like the ancient coins because it can roll. It actually has a really bad area of rolls because it can go anywhere from like 10 to 100. Like if you look at the rolls on this thing, it's absolutely crazy. So yeah, it rolls anywhere from 10 to 100% crit strike chance. I would not bother rolling these because even if you re-roll the implicits, again, you're rolling from 10 to 100. That means, yeah, there's like a 90, like it's a 1 out of like 90 chance it becomes a 100, if that makes any sense, because your rolls are either 10 to 100. So I would either, if I'm playing Trade League, buy the item at that higher rate. This one's not even that great, but look at something about like 80, and then you don't need the additional crit strike chance. You can have a much better implicit. Specifically, dex would be good. It's just this is what happened to actually be in the market that I actually got for really cheap. But yeah, mine's really bad here. And again, you'll still see that pretty much everything is just dying in 1 hit, with the exception of maybe some elite, it takes 2. So yeah, you're just deleting content here. So that's it for the gear. As far as the blessings go, the really only important one that I would say is great is the Grand Survival of Might. That crit strike avoidance is great because that's basically 2 rolls on something, so I like that one. Other than that, the extra additional mana is great from Lagoon, and then the rest, like this, just helped me out with the extra physical resistance. This wasn't even a grand one at the time. Grand Curse is great as well, if you can get that chance to pry Frailty on hit. So instead of going for Glancing Blows, which I've seen a couple other content creators go, and it's still not bad. If you are playing a shield and you can get really good block and Glancing Blow, if you're really pushing those high corruptions, that's going to be way later in the game. You could go for Glancing Blows, but like on a 35% like damage reduction, depending on how much chance you get, because you can just get 100% glancing blows, but that's a hefty investment into like 10 plus skill points. I'd rather put that into damage and then instead just have this 1 chance to pry Frailty. And if I'm attacking 6 times, remember each individual little explosive trap is exploding, and it's really only useful on bosses for like damage reduction, I would say, because most of the stuff dies so fast it doesn't matter. But applying Frailty is going to give you 18% DR, which is going to be great on every single one, versus like, well, a Glancing Blow still has to have a proc chance, and you can get about 50% relatively easy, but it's still a hefty cost in investment. But if you can get 100%, well, I mean, you can just add this to it. It's not that bad if you want to get Glancing Blows, but again, it's just going to be a hefty investment in your passives. So as far as the passive goes, well, in the very beginning, I do really like getting Sapping Strikes with Puncture, but eventually you're not going to be needing any Generator, the basic skill, if you will, for last Epoch. So we've swapped off of this, and instead we can get some extra damage with Evasion. You can also get Agility, but I really like getting Swift Assassin, Steady Hand, and then this is just kind of filler here. If you want to, you can get the Glancing Blows. This one's great as well, because most of the time you're just kind of throwing your stuff down. You can like shoot and move, and I really like this specifically for the bosses, because some of the bosses' moves, even if you have good movement speed, it just sometimes tags you, and that's the only thing that's really going to get you killed in most circumstances. But this is an okay option as well. I just respect out of sapping because we don't have anything that costs 0 other than one of the Falcon skills, which it still has a cooldown. So I would say it's much better off somewhere else. And then as far as our Falconer one, well, we're going to be going, and I'll just kind of mouse over this so this video is not too long, but everything that says dexterity, we max that out. And then this is one of the best things, especially later in the game, when you start stacking a bunch of dexterity, you get so much armor. You get additional armor per point of dexterity. And when you can get anything that scales armor, there's a blessing that can also give you like up to 55% additional armor. That's a great one to go and stack on top of this, because you do want more survivability, because this game has no internal timers. It's not like in Diablo where, like, well, if you're doing a greater rift and you want to like be able to clear it, you have to beat it within a certain time frame. So survivability will be key towards the end of the game. So yeah, you want to get as much survivability as possible. Another thing that I've added to the build that really makes the build feel so much better is Falcon Strikes as well as Dive Bomb are now instant. So that means it doesn't have a cast animation. So mid-attack, you can just basically spam it. If you have a macro, as far as I'm aware, they haven't said like you can't use macros in the game, but throw on it if you can and just have it like automatically spam the whole time. And you just get extra free DPS, which is excellent because it just activates them. Now, if you do want to activate them in better times, sure, that's fine. But you basically just spam on the thing. The downside of it is a 5% increase cooldown. It does not really matter at all. And then for the Blade Dancer over here, I just got some points in here because we need 10 points to advance and get the Shroud of Dust, which is literally just HP. There's also a chance to gain some Dust Shroud over here, which gives you extra dodge rating and a chance for Glancing Blow, so it's a lot of survivability in here. And obviously you're going to put 8 points regardless into this because, well, it's Dex. And then over here, more HP and increased bow attack speed. That is going to be good for us, and then extra dexterity over here. As far as our skills go, so Explosive Trap is the main source of proccing the ballistas. So we're going to be putting all the 20 points in here, all of the stuff, and we actually need to get impact trigger and blast rain. So this is what allows us to fire the explosive traps rather than throw them down. And then next up, as far as ballista goes, if you want to do the cold conversion, that is kind of up to you. If you don't want to do the cold conversion, I like shared enhancements, but getting perfect aim is good. If you happen to have a relic that has plus to ballista, that is ideal. Then you can put a point over here as well. This is great to put points in. So heavy bolts, perfect aim, these are all great to put in. Depends on your crit. If you have like 100% crit, just go into this. You don't need 2 points in the base crit because you're going to get enough crit anyways. So the other important stats, if you have, let's say, a plus like 2, then, well, yeah, you just put 2 or 3 points into this. This is what you'd want. And then next up, as far as our mobility skill, aerial assault, aerial prowess, we're going to put some points over there. And then we want the Falcon's Havoc to get the haste and frenzy. Frenzy is more attack speed, haste is more mobility. It's basically onslaught from PoE. And then terror wings is so great because explosive trap actually procs the ability to give you that haste and frenzy. So it's so good. It's so weird that this has incredible synergy. And then we get some extra mana over here, and then some extra cooldown. And next up we have Falconry. So Falconry over here, we can have this little thing to consume the mark, giving us additional move speed and attack speed, which is great. Just a couple other buffs, nothing too important really here to mention. And then just getting the extra crit, since our Falcon's going to get our crit multi, which is great. And then Dive Bomb can actually one-shot most things as well. So it's excellent being able to just have some additional damage, extra mana gain on boss hit. And then if you just get them 3 points into Focus Hunter, it actually costs 0 because it's 12 here. It doesn't show up in the little planner here, but yeah, it's going to cost 0 mana, so it's just free extra damage. It's great. And that pretty much wraps up the build, which will also link down below just in case I was too fast with anything. But this is going to be one of the second to the last ones. I think the next video we're going to show off all the Exalted and maybe some legendary potential on some of the pieces of gear, just maybe like 1 or 2. I think 3 or 4 is really pushing it, and it's kind of unobtainable by most players. And then if you have any idols, well, just get the ones with resistances and life where you need it. There's nothing really too important to mention here. There's no special rogue idol that you need to actually run for this build. But that's going to go ahead and wrap up the video. If you guys have any questions or want to know anything for the next part, let me know down below and I'll try to address them in the next update, which will be pretty much the final version of the build. But thanks for tuning in. If you guys enjoyed it, drop a like, and if you want to see the updated build as well as more build guides coming soon, we're going to obviously play more than one class here. There's actually a really cool Falcon Punch build that we're going to be playing, but I'm going to max this one out first. It's one of the best builds in the game, hands down. But thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.